One of the perks of being a graphic designer is that you occasionally stumble upon graphics and images that you're able to keep in your collection forever and ever and ever. Now, I've had a collection of images from The Wizard of Oz, from the movie, for a long time in my collection, and occasionally I bring them out to do a little bit of work. So I have this picture of Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch of the West that I need to cut out. So here's a little bit of magic. So there you go, there's our Margaret all cut out. I didn't just use magic, obviously, I cut it out with a scalpel, and I'll just insert a little bit of footage here of me actually doing that. But I didn't record the whole thing. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it is one of those boring, repetitive things that takes a long time to do it carefully, but then, you know, it still needs to be done. So I've just added that clip there just so you can see that I actually did do it with a scalpel. I'll also add in a clip here of where I actually went round the edges of the cutouts with distress markers. Put the clip here, just adding in the colour around those edges with the pens, just to disguise the raw white edges of the card once it had been printed. Now, I did do this on my inkjet printer, so I will need to leave it a little while for it to dry completely before I start on the construction of my thank you cards. So this is a sheet of dark green cardstock, and it's quite thick, but it doesn't really matter too much how thick your cardstock is, as long as it's thick enough to hold a tentfold. So I'm going to create a tentfold card just like this one, and as long as it's thick enough to be able to hold it, then it should be fine. So whatever you've got in your stash. Now all I'm doing is I'm going to create, as I've just shown you, a tentfold card. Now, I'm using an A4 sheet of cardstock. If you use a different size, for example if you're in the States, then all you have to do is just cut it down the middle, vertically down the middle. So my cardstock measures 210mm, so I'm going to cut it at 105. So literally straight down the middle, and then I'm going to flip it, and then I'm going to put a score line halfway through, and it measures 297mm, which is almost 12 inches, but not quite. So I'm going to just make that mark, the score line, straight down the middle, and then I can fold it into my tentfold card. Now this is what we call in Europe and possibly elsewhere an A6. In America I know that these kind of cards are classed as A2 size, or near enough. There's only a very, very small difference in the sides of the card, but my images that I've cut out are just the right size. Now I know it looks like there's bits of white there, but that's actually detail from the photograph. It's actually a bag that she has hanging from a belt, and there's that little tassel hanging on there too. But I am going to create a background for this card, and to do that I've cut a piece of watercolor cardstock which is just slightly smaller than my card base. So we're going to have a green border all the way around, and then I'm going to create a background for Margaret to sit on. So that's what I'm going to do next. So this is my watercolour cardstock, and it's £140, 300 GSM, but you can use any kind of watercolour cardstock or any kind of cardstock that you actually want to use for these. I'm going to be using my Lucky Clover Distress Oxide and Twisted Citron Distress Oxide, but I've also got some washi tape that was recently sent to me in Happy Mail, so I'm going to tear a couple of strips and add those onto the card to start off with, and I'm hoping that the oxide will cover the washi tape. So I'll just fold those over just to add a little bit of detail and interest into the background. I'm going to start off with the lighter colour, so I'm going to start off with the Twisted Citron, and I'm going to just add in that colour in random sweeps. Now I'm using greens obviously because the character of the Wicked Witch of the West is also green, so I'm going to bring in more of that light colour than I am with the dark, and that's covering that washi tape quite nicely. Hello, Mr. Bentley. Have you snuck upstairs to come and say hello? I have a little visitor that's just arrived. Because of the formulation of these inks, they do blend quite nicely, but they also have a kind of opaqueness about them, which means that they cover really, really well. So if you go over a point where you think, like I did just there, where it was a bit too dark, then you can go back in with your lighter colour and re-add it, and it works, which is lovely. So just gently going through, just add in a little bit of that darker colour here and there. And again, if you think you've added a little bit too much, you can always go back and add a bit more. And just blend until you're happy. And of course, if you want to, you can add some splashes, which I'm going to do in a second. Forgetting to speak, don't I? So I'm going to add a few dribbles, a little bit of water onto my hand, and then get a little bit of reaction going with that ink. That's it. Just to add a little bit of interest into that background. I'm going to leave that to sit for a second or two while I go and grab a sheet of kitchen towel, dry my hand, and then I'm just going to dab that off. Lovely. And then I can just quickly give my mat a clean down. Yeah. I'm happy with that kind of mottling in the background. You don't have to go mad with it, it's just a hint and a suggestion, bearing in mind it is a background. So, you know, you don't have to go too mad with it, but I'm happy with that for the time being. So next I want to add a little bit of darkness around the edges. Okay, so I've brought out my ordinary distressing black soot. I have a new foam. So I'm just going to load that up and then just gently go around the edges and add a nice dark border all the way. Doesn't matter if you go a little bit heavier in the corners, it just all adds to the effect. nice black border. I'm also now going to just grab a quick stencil from my stash, and this one, he says, so this is my Totes Amaze Bats stencil, which you can find on my website, and I'm just going to add a little bit of those bats, just lightly, just to give a hint into the background. I'm just going darker towards the top, so heavier towards the top, and then lighter and fade down. Like so. I think she's coming on rather well. So I'm just going to have a quick tidy up, and I'm going to give that a blast with my heat gun just to make sure it's all nice and dry before I start to construct the card. Okay, so our background is now completely dry. We also have our image of the Wicked Witch of the West, so all we have to do now is to start to put them together. So I'm just going to grab my Tombow Mono liquid, the aqua one, and just add some to the back. This will also give me just a little bit of wiggle room to allow me to position it just where I want it to get that equal border all the way around the outside of the card. But because it's dark, if you don't get it quite right, then it doesn't really matter, because it won't really show. So I'll just push that down while it grabs. Just give it a minute or two, and then we're ready to add our Wicked Witch. Now, you have the choice here if you want to, or there is a choice here to be made. I can either add some foam dots, some dimensional dots underneath, which will raise her up and give her some depth and dimension, which I think I'm going to do, or I can just glue her straight down flat. So, but I think I want to raise her up to give her a little bit of depth and dimension. That's not sticking down for some strange reason, so I'm going to put some weight on it and move it out of the way. Put a bit of weight on that just to hold it down so that it sticks. Maybe I didn't put enough glue on. In the meantime, I can start peeling off my dimensionals. I could use foam tape, I could use smaller ones, it's whatever you've got on hand really. It's just to add that little bit of a 3D effect. I might need some smaller ones just to go on a hand, just to give it a bit of stability. Just add a few more. That should do us for that, but I will add another one in there just to be sure. I know I'm going a bit overkill, but hey, what the heck. I'll just need some smaller ones. I'm just going to grab some from my stash. I have some small square ones here as well, so let's grab a knife. And I can put some smaller one. I can put one just behind her hand there, and another smaller one just to give that brush, her broomstick, a little bit of stability there, and also one more halfway up the hat, and one more just up that side there. I think that is just about, probably, he says, gonna do it. So all I have to do now is just to take off the tops of those pads, which are a bit finickety. That was the sound of an email coming in, if the camera picked that up. So that should leave just the big ones now, so I can just take the tops off those. Okay, so that's the last of them. So I'll just sweep those to one side, and then we can bring our base card back in, and then we can just flip her over. I'm going to line up her with the corner, and then just gently push down so those foam pads grab. And then we have a nice 3D Wicked Witch of the West. Bit of dimension on it. So I now need just to work on the sentiments. So I'm going to clear this mess up and I'll be right back. So to finish off the card, I've created a set of circular sentiments on my computer. Just a simple circle with the words "Have a wicked Halloween." Wicked, do you get it? And I've created them just in 2 different shades of green. I created them specifically at 1.5 inches because I have 1.5 inch circle punch from Stampin' Up, and I hate cutting out circles. So all I have to do is literally just pop that straight in, line it up and pop it out. And I've got the others to keep for later. I've still got the black soot on my blending foam that I used earlier, so I'm just going to go around the edges and just darken off those raw white bits, and they're covered lovely. So I have a choice of the lighter one or the darker one. So I'm going to bring the card in, and I'm just going to place them both where I want to put them. So I want to put my circular sentiment there so that her hat is poking just into or breaking into the circle, which gives it another illusion of depth. So even though we know she's stood on foam pads. So that's the lighter one, and that's the darker one. I'm thinking the darker one. So all I have to do is pop that to one side and save that for later. Is grab my glue, a little blob of glue on the back, and then I can just slide that underneath so that breaks into the washi tape down the right hand side, and also the brow of her hat breaks over the top, and it just gives you that impression that she's bursting from the card, which kind of she is. So the inside of the card I'm going to leave blank. I will put just a sheet of white paper in there as an insert that I can, in fact, let's just do that actually. Let's just do it and finish the card off completely. So I'm going to use my paper trimmer, and I'm just going to use the bottom of that sheet. Now I know that the card is a particular size, so I know that if I cut it just a little bit smaller than the card front, that it will fit inside, and then I can just add a little bit of black into there just to create a kind of framey kind of border. And it doesn't matter if it gets a little bit grungy, if it gets a little bit dirty, because it's a Halloween card. That's what it's all about. If you wanted to add a little bit of that stenciling onto this, you could do as well, just to add a little bit more interest. Just move that to one side. I've got a little bit of that green left over from the oxide, so I'm just going to add a little bit of that in too, just to give it a little bit of difference. There. And also, just have a little bit of washi tape, and I'm going to add a little bit of that just onto the bottom, fold it over, and then we can grab some glue, a couple of blobs, open the card up, and then we can just sit that in the middle like so, and we now have somewhere we can write a little message or a little note to say Happy Halloween. So I've now got 3 more pictures of Margaret that I printed off on my inkjet printer. I've also got all the rest of the sentiments. I've also got some more watercolor cardstock to make another 3 cards to make this a set of 4. So that's what I'm going to do now.